Hello everyone, welcome back to another video, and this is just going to be my thoughts, throwing them out there about Hiroto and his character, especially because of people in the comments sections, either on YouTube or on Twitter, saying things, like, it would be great if Hiroto would have got Eve back. I keep getting those comments, or people come up in the YouTube live chat saying, wouldn't it be great if Eve came back? And this is more or less to defend my position that I've reinforced twice now. Once on my Neptate video, and the other one on the actual episode review for, I think it was either 22 or 23, where Hiroto is finally coming to accept what's going on with Eve. That my stance is basically, if Eve would have come back to, be with Hiroto again properly, a bit like with Riku and Sura, it would have completely killed his character. And what I mean by that is his character progression throughout the entire story is all about the 5 stages of grieving, about someone dying. And to interrupt that, to suddenly negate that completely, he'd have no more character progression in the show. His entire story is built upon the premise of going through grieving, trying to look for Eve, and at the same time happens to stumble upon Eldora. And later on in his storyline, that's when we get to see him focusing more on saving Eldora. Up until then, he's going through denial, bargaining, and depression, which are 3 stages of grieving. So let's get right into this. We have denial, which we see later on in the story. I think it's around about episode 20 where we get to see what actually happened to Eve. We get to see denial, where at first he's like, I don't believe this is happening. What's going on? When we find out she's been protecting GBN all this time by filtering all the errors from GBN into herself. And then the errors and things that happen as a result of Sura using her wings of light with Riku, that just pushes her over the edge, and as a result she needs to be destroyed. And this is where we see Hiroto just lose it completely. He starts the first bit of grieving, which is denial, when eventually she's destroyed. He just flat out is like, no, I can't believe this, what's going on? Then when we see him go to GBN with Kazami, and we get to see him in the first couple of episodes looking around trying to find something, which we later on find is Eve. What he's doing there is he's bargaining with himself. He's saying, you know what, maybe she's around here somewhere, maybe this didn't happen. It's still part of the denial bit, but the bargaining section is saying, well, maybe this didn't happen, maybe she's out there somewhere. I didn't properly see her get deleted. We don't know whether she's been deleted properly, so maybe she's still out there. That's the bargaining part. And then, in between the bargaining section is where we get to see a lot of episodes where he's feeling down, he's feeling depressed, and we have Hinata there to talk to him, to try and spur him on, and she's trying to help him get through this all the time. And during that phase is when he's suffering from depression. Obviously, he can't deal with this, he can't deal with Eve's passing, so as a result, he kind of retreats inside himself. He's not, obviously, mentally fit or well for being himself. Hinata sees this and notices that he's more than just feeling down. He's more than upset. He's clearly not himself. And this is where we get to see Hiroto for most of the early parts of the show. Depressed Hiroto kind of reminds me of like a meme, sort of the punished snake thing from Metal Gear. But depressed Hiroto is something that we see very early on. It's not so much that he's a silent badass, that is going around just picking fights with everybody and using his abilities just to defeat everyone. He's actively searching for Eve, and during this time, he's so depressed. He's just focused on doing what he can in GBN, and he's not thinking of anything else. And this is why he seems outwardly cold to everybody. This is why Hinata picks up on it and says, like, look, dude, are you okay? Most of the time, and is trying to reassure him, is trying to get him to open up a little bit more, but he's too closed off. And this is also why I think May says to him, you're a little bit like me, you're searching for something. The only difference is I'd ask for help, because typically someone like that who's depressed might not be open to just asking for help from people. So May is different in that she doesn't suffer from depression. She's just looking for something and she's found it. She's not bargaining. She's not going through the stages of grief, so she's not bargaining and thinking, you know what, I could possibly find this. She's actively looking for her meaning in life, and she does find it. And it's totally different to Hiroto and his depression and his bargaining phase that we see him in most of the time. When we get to about 18, or episode 18, this is where we get to see anger. We also get to see this at certain other sections as well, like for instance, I think in episode 3 as well with the Mars armor, you can see little bits of it peeking through, but it is nice to go back and rewatch this show and see little bits of it appearing here and there as hints. Ep 3 with the Mars armor, where we see Hiroto push the One-Eyes Grunt out of the village and then carve it up completely. You could say that was a little bit of anger, because he didn't realize there would be one unit left, and he's got to make a quick decision, and he has to make sure that everything is over with without anybody getting hurt. And as a result, that turns into anger, which calls on the Mars armor, which does fit with the Mars theme of it being, you know, like a war kind of thing, with Mars being the god of war. But then later on, it's when we see Alice challenge Hiroto's ideal. He's been suffering from depression and all these other parts of grief up until episode 18, and this is where we start seeing him breaking out of it and slowly slipping into acceptance. And it's when Alice challenges his ideal and says, look at who you are, you know, you're basically the perfect fighter, the way that you fight is great. And before this, we'd already seen the mask slipping off Hiroto anyway, when people had been saying, you know what, it's great teamwork, thank you for being there for me, thank you for not using me as a tool like he was in the first couple of episodes, or for the first part of the show where we get to see him using people as tools or bait. We don't see that anymore. What we see is, instead of in episode 18, I think it is, where Kazami runs in to defend Maya and Stola, and I think Freddy as well, from Alice's beam shot, that's when we get to see, instead of Hiroto using them as bait and then sniping Alice directly and finishing him off right then and there, what we see is him save Kazami and everybody else by intercepting the beam and sniping that away instead, and then using a secondary shot to get rid of Alice. And that's what he starts slowly going into acceptance, which is the final stage of grieving. And during the fight where they're on top of the mountain and they're going at each other with sabers, we can see again that he's slowly accepting everything, because Alice is challenging him again and saying, look, this is the perfect way of fighting. And Hiroto's like, no, this is not who I am. And you can slowly see that he's realizing what's happened and what he's become in that moment, and he doesn't want to be like that. So he's accepting that, yeah, what he's done is wrong, and it's not what Eve wanted. And then that's where you get to see him realize, yeah, he finally might have to accept that Eve's not around. But the final 2 bits where you can tell he's finally gone through the last stage of grief and he's moved on. By the last 2 episodes, he's moved on properly. Like in 26, he's completely finished grieving. But I think it's in either 22 or 23 and 25 is where we get to see him make the final steps, and that's where he talks to Kuradon and he tells him when he's going to kill Masaki for regretting not having taken any action beforehand to stop him and having his wing destroyed in the process. He's like, no, you're going to do something really bad and then you'll regret it and then you'll be just like me. And that bit when he says that, it's incredibly emotional and it almost has me choking up every single time. But when you look at it, Hiroto's finally admitting to himself there that he's realized, yeah, she ain't coming back. And then in 25 is where we get the final sort of send off for Eve with the Neptate armor, and that's more or less when he's finished his acceptance. He's said goodbye, and this is when he leaves the Neptate armor in orbit. Before then, it's a very glorious send off for the Neptate armor that represents the final farewell to Eve. It was the final suit that they worked on together that they didn't finish. And I go over more of that in my Neptate video. But by saying goodbye to the Neptate armor that was representative of Eve, he's finally got over it. And it's a fantastic story when you realize what's going on, and when you go back and watch it again and see all these little bits seeping through the individual stages of grief, the denial, the anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. When you go back and rewatch it, it is nice to see all these little bits come through and be like, oh god, yeah, that part, that's really interesting. It builds more on Hiroto's character, and that grieving and the journey to getting over it, that's his entire character, his entire story through the show is that. So to suddenly halfway through that give him Eve back, he wouldn't know what to do. You're surprising him with something which is basically impossible going through what we've just talked about. He's getting something back which he, even early on in the show, knows might not be possible, or maybe he's just kidding himself. Maybe he already knows that, yeah, this is probably impossible, and he's just blocking it out because of the stages that we've just gone over. But to just give him something like that again, what then would be his character progression? He's got Eve back, now what? We're going to focus on saving Eldora. Sure, that's something that he can focus on, but as a character, he has nowhere else to go. There is nowhere left for him to progress as a person in the story. When you do that to him, it destroys all that effort that was made to build up this mature narrative. And Hiroto, as a character who has to go through all this trouble, it would destroy all of that. So I don't think having Eve back was a way to go, and I'm glad they didn't do it. I'm so glad they didn't do it. I can understand why people would have wanted her back just to see them being a happy couple again, especially because she inspired him. She helped make the planet system, basically, by inspiring Hiroto with different ideas and things and encouraging him to continue on and keep trying to enjoy GBN. But honestly, I don't think that was the right way to go, and I'm going to stand by that. Anyway, what do you guys think of all of this? What do you think about the 5 stages of grieving? And would you go back and rewatch the show and keep an eye out for those things and see if it changed your idea of the show or your opinion of it? Anyway, I'll see you in the comments section, and I'll see you on the next one.